It started with a scent. Not a perfume, not exactly. More like the lingering ghost of it mixed with something else. A faint metallic tang of ambition, perhaps. I walked into Charlie's office that Tuesday evening, long after everyone else had left, ostensibly to grab some forgotten documents. The air was still heavy with the day's stale coffee and the faint, unmistakable trace of Amelia's signature jasmine. My wife's jasmine. The scent that had filled our home clung to her clothes, and now inexplicably permeated the inner sanctum of my boss. I'm David, 35 years old, a senior analyst at Sterling and Finch, a name synonymous with prestige and power in the financial sector. For 10 years, I'd poured my life into that firm, meticulously climbing the ladder, sacrificing weekends, late nights, even holidays. I built a career, a reputation for being sharp, reliable, and utterly dedicated. And for the last 7 of those years, I'd been building a life with Amelia. She was the head of marketing, a force of nature, brilliant, charismatic, with a laugh that could disarm anyone. We were the power couple, the golden pair, at least in our own minds, and certainly in the eyes of our colleagues. Charlie, our CEO, was more than just a boss. He was a mentor, a man I respected, admired, who had taken me under his wing, guiding my trajectory, offering advice, even celebrating our anniversaries with a thoughtful bottle of wine. Or so I thought. The documents I'd supposedly forgotten were just an excuse. A gut feeling, a whisper of unease that had been growing louder over the past few weeks, had pulled me back to the office. It began subtly. Amelia's phone always face down, her sudden need for late-night strategy sessions with Charlie, a certain guardedness in her eyes when I asked about her day. Then there were the small, almost imperceptible shifts. A new, expensive watch Charlie wore, a subtle change in Amelia's routine, a shared glance between them, and a meeting that lasted a fraction of a second too long. Each instance, a tiny, discordant note in the symphony of our lives. Individually, they were nothing. Together they formed a mosaic of suspicion, a pattern that screamed betrayal to my analytical mind. My job was to see patterns where others saw chaos, to connect dots that seemed miles apart. And the dots were starting to form a very ugly picture. That night, the jasmine wasn't just a ghost, it was a declaration. It clung to the rich leather of Charlie's executive chair, to the edge of his polished mahogany desk, even to the faint indentation on the visitor's sofa, as if someone had just risen from it. It wasn't just a casual visit, this was a presence, a prolonged, intimate presence. My mind, usually a fortress of logic and reason, felt like it was fracturing. The world tilted on its axis, the solid ground beneath me dissolving into an abyss of disbelief. But I didn't stumble. I didn't shout. I didn't even breathe too loudly. My hands, usually so expressive, remained still at my sides. My first instinct, the primal urge, was to smash something, to confront, to rage, to demand answers, to tear down the carefully constructed facade of my life. But years of training, of disciplined thought, of suppressing emotion in high-stakes negotiations, kicked in. I felt a coldness spread through me, starting in my chest and radiating outwards, numbing the searing pain. It wasn't shock. It was a strange, almost clinical detachment. My vision sharpened, focusing on the minute details. A stray strand of Amelia's dark hair on the carpet, a half-empty glass of sparkling water. 2 distinct impressions on the sofa cushions. I picked up the documents I'd come for, my hand steady, my face, I imagine, a mask of perfect neutrality. I even straightened a stack of papers on Charlie's desk, a small, meaningless act of control in a moment of utter chaos, a silent assertion that I was still here, still observing. I walked out of that office, down the silent, polished corridors, the hum of the building's ventilation system, the only sound echoing my own internal tremor. The elevator descended, a slow, deliberate drop into a new reality. The city lights blurred outside the taxi window as I rode home, but my vision was sharper than ever. I saw Amelia's face, her smile, her easy laughter, and behind it, a shadow, a lie. And then I saw Charlie, his paternalistic hand on my shoulder, his words of encouragement, his mentorship. All of it, a grotesque charade, a performance designed to keep me blind. The vulnerability I felt initially, the raw, gut-wrenching betrayal, began to recede, replaced by something far more dangerous. It was a clarity, sharp and unforgiving. They had played me for a fool. They had underestimated me. They had mistaken my trust for naivete, my quiet nature for weakness. And in that moment, watching the city lights streak past, a single chilling thought solidified in my mind. That's when I realized I didn't lose her. They lost me. And what they were about to lose, they couldn't even begin to comprehend. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about leverage. It was about control. It was about making them understand the true cost of their deception. If you've ever felt that cold, calculating shift, that moment when the world goes quiet and a plan begins to form, you know exactly what I mean. What would you have done if you were me? Would you have confronted them, or would you have waited just like I did? Share your thoughts below. The taxi dropped me off a block from our apartment building. I needed the walk, the cold night air a physical anchor against the storm raging inside. Amelia was already asleep when I got in, curled on her side, the faint glow of her phone illuminating her face. I watched her for a long moment, a stranger in my own home. The jasmine scent, now a phantom, seemed to cling to her too, a silent accusation. I showered, the hot water doing little to wash away the chill that had settled deep in my bones. I lay beside her, staring at the ceiling, my mind a whirlwind of fragmented images. Charlie's office, the scent, the casual intimacy of two impressions on a sofa. But beneath the chaos, a new, colder current was forming. A strategy. The next morning, I was David. The same David who kissed his wife goodbye, who exchanged pleasantries with the doorman, who navigated the morning traffic with practiced ease. At Sterling and Finch, I was the same senior analyst, impeccably dressed, coffee in hand, ready for the day's grind. I greeted Charlie with a firm handshake, met Amelia's eyes across the conference room table with a practiced, neutral smile. No tremor in my voice, no flicker in my gaze. The mask was perfect. They saw nothing. They suspected nothing. And that, I realized, was my greatest weapon. But beneath the veneer of normalcy, my senses were heightened, tuned to a frequency only I could hear. Every interaction became a data point, every casual glance a potential clue. I watched Amelia in meetings, noting how her eyes would subtly drift towards Charlie, a micro-expression of shared understanding passing between them, too quick for anyone else to catch. I observed Charlie's paternalistic gestures towards her, the way he'd linger a moment too long when passing her desk, the almost imperceptible softening of his voice when he addressed her. Before, I dismissed these as professional camaraderie, the natural dynamic of a mentor and a rising star. Now, they were glaring neon signs, screaming their deception. Amelia's excuses for late nights grew more elaborate, her phone more guarded. Client dinner ran long, she'd say, her eyes darting away for a split second. Emergency strategy session, Charlie would echo in a company-wide email, always CCing me, a performative inclusion that now felt like a cruel joke. I started noticing the small inconsistencies. A restaurant receipt for two when she claimed a group, a taxi fare that took her in the opposite direction of the supposed client's office. I didn't confront, I didn't question. I simply observed, cataloged, and filed away. Each lie, each subtle betrayal was a brick in the wall I was building around my emotions, transforming the raw pain into a cold, hard resolve. The initial shock, the gut-wrenching anger had not vanished. It had simply transmuted. It was no longer a wild, destructive fire, but a controlled, precise heat, forging my intellect into a weapon. They had underestimated me, believing my quiet nature was a sign of weakness, my trust a symptom of naivete. They saw a man who would crumble, who would rage, who would make a scene, but I was not that man. I was an analyst. My job was to identify vulnerabilities, to exploit inefficiencies, to turn data into decisive action. And now, they were the data. Their affair, their deception, their arrogance, these were the vulnerabilities I would exploit. My plan began subtly, almost imperceptibly. I started spending more time in the office after hours, ostensibly catching up on reports. But my real work was elsewhere. I began a deep dive into Sterling and Finch's most critical contracts, the multi-million-dollar deals that form the backbone of our revenue. My position as a senior analyst gave me legitimate access to these documents, to the intricate legal clauses, the financial structures, the performance metrics. I wasn't just reading them, I was dissecting them, looking for every loophole, every contingency, every point of leverage. I cross-referenced client relationships, identified key stakeholders, and mapped out the intricate web of dependencies that held the company together. I also started subtly shifting my workload, volunteering for projects that gave me oversight of specific departments, particularly those related to legal and compliance. I initiated a comprehensive review of vendor agreements that allowed me to scrutinize every third-party relationship, every service provider, every financial commitment. It was tedious, meticulous work, but each detail I uncovered was a piece of the puzzle, a potential lever I could pull. I started building relationships with key personnel in IT and legal, people who held the keys to information, cultivating their trust with small favors, insightful observations, and a genuine interest in their work. They saw a dedicated colleague. I saw potential allies, unwitting pawns in a game they didn't even know was being played. The goal was not just to expose them, but to dismantle their world, piece by calculated piece. To make them understand the true cost of their betrayal, not just emotionally, but professionally, financially. I wanted to hit them where it hurt the most, where their ambition and carefully constructed reputations resided. My anger had cooled into a chilling resolve, a strategic patience that felt almost predatory. I was no longer a victim, I was a hunter, meticulously setting traps, laying the groundwork for a devastating fall. One evening, after everyone had left, I sat in my office, the glow of my monitor illuminating my face. I had just finished reviewing the terms of the company's largest client contract, a deal worth hundreds of millions, personally overseen by Charlie and Amelia. It was a masterpiece of legal engineering, designed to be ironclad. But I had found a clause, a small, almost insignificant rider concerning a specific performance metric that, if triggered, could allow for a renegotiation of terms or, even under extreme circumstances, a transfer of account management. It was a long shot, a needle in a haystack, but it was there, and I knew exactly how to trigger it. My fingers flew across the keyboard, accessing the company's internal server. I navigated through layers of encrypted files, past firewalls and security protocols, until I found what I was looking for, the master access logs for all executive accounts. With a few precise keystrokes, I created a ghost account, a digital shadow with administrative privileges, untraceable and invisible to the standard audit trails. It was a backdoor, a secret key to every digital corner of Sterling and Finch, including Charlie's private files and Amelia's confidential communications. She had no idea I'd already logged into her email and was now reading every single message. Would you stay quiet too, or expose them right there? Let me know in the comments. Reading Amelia's emails was like peering into a meticulously crafted lie, a digital diary of deception. It wasn't just the intimate exchanges with Charlie, the clandestine rendezvous, the pet names that made my stomach churn. It was the strategic discussions, the shared ambition, the casual way they plotted to sideline my projects, to subtly undermine my standing within the firm. My ideas, presented in team meetings, would mysteriously resurface weeks later, rebranded as Amelia's or Charlie's, with just enough alteration to claim originality. Performance metrics for my department were subtly recontextualized in executive summaries, highlighting minor fluctuations as significant downturns, while their own departments received glowing, often inflated appraisals. This wasn't just an affair, it was a corporate coup, a calculated effort to dismantle my career and pave Amelia's path to the executive suite, perhaps even to my own position. The betrayal was deeper, more insidious than I had initially imagined. It was a professional assassination executed with a smile and a shared glance across the boardroom. My ghost account, the digital shadow I'd created, became my eyes and ears. I set up automated keyword alerts, tracking their communications, their calendars, even their travel itineraries. I knew when they were meeting, what they were discussing, and how they planned to execute their next move. I was a phantom presence in their digital lives, an unseen observer collecting every piece of evidence, every incriminating detail. The raw, emotional pain of betrayal had now fully crystallized into a cold, precise instrument of justice. My objective was no longer just to expose, it was to systematically dismantle. The execution of my plan began with the major client contract, the multi-million-dollar deal I had identified as their Achilles heel. My ghost account provided me with unfettered access to the internal reporting systems. I didn't falsify data, that would be too crude, too easily traceable. Instead, I began to subtly re-emphasize existing data points. Minor, previously overlooked performance discrepancies were now highlighted in weekly reports. I introduced new, more stringent analytical models, ostensibly to improve oversight, but in reality designed to magnify the impact of these minor deviations. The cumulative effect was a slow, almost imperceptible erosion of confidence in the contract's performance, a quiet drumbeat of underperformance that began to resonate through the executive ranks. Simultaneously, I initiated a comprehensive review of vendor agreements, a project I had volunteered for, which gave me legitimate access to every third-party relationship Sterling and Finch maintained. Within this review, I meticulously audited the contracts of several key suppliers that Charlie and Amelia had personally championed. I uncovered minor non-compliance issues, small print violations, and inflated service charges that, while not catastrophic individually, painted a picture of lax oversight and potential favoritism when aggregated. These findings were then discreetly funneled to the compliance department, not as accusations, but as areas for potential optimization and risk mitigation. The reports were factual, irrefutable, and entirely devoid of personal bias, yet their implications were devastating. My social engineering was equally subtle. I began cultivating relationships with key personnel in HR and legal, not through overt manipulation, but through genuine professional engagement. I offered insights, shared data, and posed hypothetical questions about corporate ethics and conflict of interest policies. Just brainstorming best practices, I'd say, my tone always measured, my demeanor always professional. These conversations, seemingly innocuous, planted seeds of doubt, prompting internal discussions and eventually discrete inquiries into the very areas I wanted scrutinized. I also subtly shifted key personnel, recommending promotions or transfers for competent, loyal individuals into positions where they would inadvertently become obstacles to Charlie and Amelia's plans, or provide me with additional unfiltered information. The first signs of their confusion began to surface, Charlie, usually unflappable, started showing signs of agitation. He called an unscheduled meeting to address the unexpected downturn in the major client contract's performance, demanding explanations from his team. Amelia, usually so composed, became visibly stressed, her phone calls more frequent, her expressions more strained. They couldn't understand why these issues, previously minor, were suddenly escalating, why the ground beneath them felt like it was shifting. They suspected internal sabotage, but their paranoia led them to suspect each other or other colleagues, never me. The trust between them, once a formidable alliance, began to fray at the edges, replaced by suspicion and thinly veiled accusations. I maintained my facade of unwavering loyalty and dedication. I offered Charlie my expertise in analyzing the performance reports, subtly guiding him towards conclusions that reinforced the narrative of underperformance. I even volunteered to assist Amelia in her vendor review, gaining even deeper access to the very documents I had already compromised. I was the trusted advisor, the diligent colleague, the man who was always there to help, even as I meticulously tightened the noose. My control was absolute, yet invisible. I was the puppet master, pulling strings from the shadows, watching their carefully constructed world begin to crumble. The culmination of my efforts was scheduled for the quarterly board meeting. I had ensured that the performance review of the major client contract, along with the vendor optimization report, would be presented as critical agenda items. The data, meticulously compiled and presented in an objective, corporate tone, would speak for itself. It would highlight not just the underperformance, but also the systemic oversight failures, the potential conflicts of interest, and the financial irregularities that had been allowed to fester under Charlie and Amelia's direct purview. The narrative was clear: a failure of leadership, a breach of trust, and a significant financial risk to the company. The night before the meeting, I sat alone in my office, the city lights twinkling outside like distant and different stars. My desk was clean, my reports finalized, every detail double-checked. I felt no triumph, no elation, only a profound, icy calm. The game was almost over. Tomorrow, the carefully constructed edifice of their careers, built on lies and betrayal, would come crashing down. Tomorrow's meeting would decide everything. Would you have gone this far? Let me know in the comments. The boardroom was a theater of hushed anticipation, the air thick with unspoken tension. Charlie, seated at the head of the polished mahogany table, looked unusually pale, his usual swagger replaced by a nervous fidgeting. Amelia beside him maintained a facade of cool professionalism, but I could see the subtle tremor in her hands as she adjusted her notes. They were oblivious, still believing they were in control, still convinced that their carefully constructed narrative would hold. I sat across from them, an unassuming figure, my reports neatly stacked, my expression unreadable. The meeting began with the usual pleasantries, the quarterly review of financials, market projections. Then the agenda shifted. My name was called. I rose, walked to the projector, and began. My voice was calm, measured, devoid of any emotion. I presented the performance review of the major client contract, not as an accusation, but as a purely objective analysis. I highlighted the underperformance, the missed targets, the escalating risks, all meticulously documented, cross-referenced, and verified. The data, presented in crisp charts and irrefutable figures, painted a stark picture of mismanagement and potential financial exposure. Charlie interrupted, attempting to deflect, to downplay, but I had anticipated every objection, every excuse. My responses were precise, backed by irrefutable evidence, each counterpoint delivered with the cold logic of a machine. Then came the vendor optimization report. Here I detailed the irregularities, the inflated service charges, the non-compliance issues, the questionable procurement processes tied to specific third-party providers. I didn't name names, but the connections were clear, the implications damning. The board members, initially skeptical, grew increasingly uneasy. Their murmurs turned to pointed questions, their gazes shifting from my impassive face to Charlie and Amelia, who now looked visibly shaken. Amelia tried to interject, to defend her department, but her words lacked conviction, her arguments easily dismantled by the sheer weight of the data. The final blow came when I presented the internal audit findings. Not just the financial discrepancies, but the systemic failures in oversight, the breaches of corporate governance, and the clear pattern of preferential treatment. I concluded by stating, with a chilling lack of emphasis, that these issues, left unaddressed, posed a significant fiduciary risk to the company and could lead to severe reputational damage and legal repercussions. I then revealed the clause in the major client contract, the one I had found weeks ago, which allowed for immediate renegotiation and, crucially, a transfer of account management in cases of gross negligence or conflict of interest. The silence that followed was deafening. Charlie's face was a mask of dawning horror, his eyes darting between me and the board members, finally settling on Amelia with a look of desperate accusation. Amelia, for her part, had gone utterly white, her carefully constructed composure shattering. She knew, she finally understood. It wasn't just about the affair, it was about everything. The ambition, the manipulation, the quiet sabotage. It was all laid bare. The board's decision was swift and decisive. Charlie was immediately placed on administrative leave, pending a full internal investigation into his conduct and the financial irregularities. Amelia, due to her direct involvement in the vendor contracts and the client account, faced similar immediate suspension. The room emptied quickly, the board members exiting with grim faces, leaving only the three of us. Charlie finally found his voice, a strangled whisper. You did this. Amelia stared at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and dawning hatred. How could you? I looked at them, not with triumph, not with anger, but with a profound, almost clinical indifference. There was no joy, no catharsis in their downfall, only the quiet satisfaction of a complex problem solved. A meticulously executed plan brought to fruition. They had expected rage, tears, a dramatic confrontation. They had expected an emotional man, but the man they knew, the man they had betrayed, was gone. In his place stood an architect of consequence. You underestimated me, I said, my voice flat, devoid of inflection. You mistook my patience for weakness, my trust for naivete. You thought you could play me for a fool. My gaze lingered on Amelia. You never saw it coming, did you? The quiet one, the analyst, the man who just observed? I then turned to Charlie. As for the contracts, I continued, my voice gaining a subtle edge, the board has decided, given the circumstances, to transfer all primary account management responsibilities, including the multi-million-dollar client, to a more reliable and trustworthy senior analyst, effective immediately. I paused, letting the words sink in. To me. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the distant hum of the building's ventilation. They had lost everything they had built, everything they had conspired for. And I, the man they had sought to destroy, had quietly absorbed it all. Weeks turned into months. The internal investigation concluded, confirming every detail I had meticulously uncovered. Charlie was dismissed, his career in the financial sector irrevocably ruined. Amelia, facing similar charges and a tarnished reputation, resigned before she could be formally terminated. Our divorce was swift, quiet, and entirely devoid of emotion. The house, the shared life, the memories, they felt like artifacts from another lifetime, belonging to a different man. I now sit in Charlie's old office, the corner suite with the panoramic view of the city. The jasmine scent is long gone, replaced by the crisp, clean smell of success. My name is on the door, on the contracts, on the future of Sterling and Finch. I look out at the sprawling metropolis, a vast, intricate network of ambition and consequence. I built this, not with grand gestures or emotional outbursts, but with quiet observation, cold logic, and an unwavering resolve. The man who found out is now the man in charge. I never raised my voice. I didn't need to. If you found this story compelling, please consider giving it a like. It helps more people discover stories like this.